In the winter of 1985, a terrible tragedy unfolded near the village of Sosnovka, outside Moscow, shocking all the local residents. Alla Nupokoeva, a local resident and saleswoman at a rural store, was walking near her village when she discovered bloody footprints in the snow. These tracks led to one of the summer cottages belonging to the Solomatins. Approaching closer, the woman noticed thick smoke billowing from the house. Frightened, she looked inside and saw a horrific scene: two young people lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Without hesitation, the woman rushed out into the street and called for help. Thanks to the efforts of local residents, the fire was extinguished, but almost all possible evidence was destroyed, and the crime scene was trampled. An investigation began, accompanied by public scandal, as the victims turned out to be students at one of the capital's most prestigious universities. They belonged to the so-called Golden Youth. Viktor Sareda was the son of a diplomat, and Sergei Kapustin was the son of a high-ranking party official from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The investigation led to the Solomatins family, as the dacha where the murder took place belonged to Mikhail Solomatins. His son Valery, a simple guy from a working-class family, was considered a talented student who had entered university solely thanks to his knowledge and hard work. However, Valery went missing, and suspicion immediately fell on him. According to the investigation, he allegedly killed his friends and fled. Soon, Alla Nupokoeva intervened in the case, stating emphatically that the victims were not entirely innocent. She told investigators about a conflict that had occurred between her and the victims. On the eve of the incident, Viktor Sareda and Sergei Kapustin went to a village store and demanded that they be sold alcohol. Alla refused, citing the lack of documents confirming their age. This refusal provoked aggression in the young men, and they caused a real ruckus, which attracted the attention of local hooligans, brothers Yegor and Fyodor Kharlamov. After hearing Alla's testimony, the investigators went to the Kharlamovs' house. There they found Fyodor's wife, who, noticing the investigators, hurried to throw a small bundle into the river. The bundle was retrieved, and a blood-stained shirt was found inside. Fyodor explained that he had accidentally cut himself while restoring antique furniture, and his wife, fearing accusations, had decided to get rid of the blood-stained items. However, the story did not end there. The next morning, the third participant in the feast, Valery Solomatov, was found. His body was discovered by Yegor Kharlamov in a low-lying area near a frozen swamp. Valery's head was smashed, and a glove belonging to Yegor was found next to the body. The Kharlamov brothers were arrested on suspicion of murder, but investigator Naimov, who was leading the case, did not believe in their guilt. After examining the poker found near the body, he noticed inconsistencies in the testimony and the evidence collected. Naimov's doubts only grew stronger as key pieces of evidence disappeared and were replaced by new, even more confusing ones. Investigator Naimov, taking on this complicated case, continued to gather evidence despite pressure from the influential parents of the victims. One of the key findings was the trace of a missing poker, which, as it turned out, belonged to the owner of one of the houses in Sosnovka, Ksenia Baldina. The woman said that it was indeed her property and that the poker was usually kept on her property. In the evenings, Ksenia often stayed at home with Anatoly Ryabokin, the caretaker of the cottage village, who was her lover. She admitted that on the evening of the murder, she and Ryabokin were sitting at the table drinking when they heard a noise in the yard. Ksenia ran outside and saw two young men, who were later killed, chasing her chickens. One of the men tried to catch a bird, and the third, who came out from behind the corner of the house with a knife in his hands, rushed after her when she returned to the house. According to Baldina, Ryabokin, defending her, knocked the knife out of the attacker's hands, but the attacker grabbed a poker and struck him on the head. Ryabokin lost consciousness, and the young men entered the house, gathered alcohol and food from the table, and then left, taking the poker with them. When he woke up in the morning, Ryabokin tried to leave the village unnoticed, but investigator Naimov, who had arrived to investigate, detained him. An inspection of the guardhouse provided new clues. Fingerprints of the victims were found on the table and dishes, indicating that they had been in the guardhouse before their death. In addition, an electric stove was found turned on, suggesting that those who left the scene had done so in a hurry. The investigator assumed that Ryabokin was not guilty of murder, but his testimony could shed light on the motives and participants in the events. Meanwhile, the parents of the victims continued to put pressure on the investigation team. Using their connections, they secured the intervention of the regional prosecutor, who demanded that the Kharlamov brothers be pressed and made to confess. Naimov, showing persistence and refusing to fabricate evidence, was summoned for a conversation with a deputy regional prosecutor. There, he was warned that disobedience could result in the loss of his party membership, which would mean the end of his career. However, Naimov stood his ground and was soon removed from the case. The investigation was handed over to another investigator, Taranchuk. The new investigator wasted no time in conducting new interrogations and began to check the versions indicated by Naimov. One of the findings was a bath broom left on the wall of the guardhouse. A pathological examination confirmed that the victims had been in the bathhouse before their death. Taranchuk began to go around the village to find out which bathhouse the victims could have been in. It soon became clear that only one of the 4 bathhouses had been heated that day. Its owner turned out to be a local resident named Pyotr Burkov. An investigation of Burkov and his relatives yielded unexpected results. It turned out that his son, Gennady Burkov, a former police major, had been dismissed from the police force several years earlier for gross misconduct. Gennady, a physically strong and well-trained fighter, had a difficult personality. Once, he exceeded his authority. While arresting a rapist, Gennady broke his neck. This caused a scandal, and he was dismissed from service. Information about the Burkov family made investigators wary, especially after it became clear that on the day of the murder, Gennady and his father left the village and headed for Moscow. Taranchuk organized the arrest of Gennady Burkov, assuming that he could be an important witness or even a suspect. Expecting resistance, a group of operatives arrived at his temporary residence fully armed. However, contrary to expectations, Gennady, seeing the investigators, immediately raised his hands and told them not to touch his daughter. Further investigation and new facts that emerged during the investigators' work showed that the deceased young men had behaved extremely aggressively and criminally, and if they had survived, they would hardly have been able to escape justice, even despite their high-ranking parents. Immediately after beating up the guard Ryabokin, the drunken trio went in search of entertainment. Among the local residents, they made their way to the home of pensioner Viktor Burkov to ask him for the keys to the bathhouse. Realizing that if he refused, he could get into trouble, the old man reluctantly gave them the keys. Unfortunately for him, his granddaughter Marina, a student who had come to visit her grandfather for the weekend, was at home at the time. Upon entering the house, the young men quickly noticed the girl. Their perverted behavior and alcohol intoxication led to tragic events. Ignoring her protests, they began to insult her, and then, putting a dog collar around her neck, dragged her into the bathhouse by force. There they abused the girl, filming it on their cell phones. After getting what they wanted, they left her in the bathhouse and went back, laughing. Despite their condition, they were well aware of the gravity of what they had done. Valery Solomatov was particularly upset, realizing that what they had done would inevitably come to light. On the way back, Solomatov suddenly felt ill and decided to retreat to the toilet, which was located near Burkov's house. At that moment, Viktor Burkov himself appeared on the street, having come out of the house to check if everything was in order. When he saw his granddaughter, who had been found in the bathhouse by neighbors, in tears, with a collar around her neck and signs of violence, he understood what had happened. A former police officer with military bearing and a keen sense of justice, he was enraged and decided to punish the perpetrators himself. When he saw Solomatov coming out of the toilet, Burkov realized who was behind this nightmare. Valery, realizing that he had been recognized, tried to escape, but the former Special Forces officer caught up with him in a nearby swamp. A fight ensued between them, in which Burkov, overcome with rage, grabbed a nearby poker and struck the criminal several times on the head. Solomatov died on the spot. Upon learning what had happened, the parents of the deceased young people decided to conceal the circumstances of the crime in order to save their families' reputations. They used their connections to exert pressure on the investigation and the court. As a result, all the facts relating to the assault on Marina Burkova, the beating of the guard, and other crimes were deliberately excluded from the case file. The court considered the case solely as a murder committed by Burkov out of personal animosity. His lawyers were unable to present evidence that could have mitigated the sentence. The court was under incredible pressure. The parents of the deceased young people did everything they could to prevent anyone from learning the true circumstances of what had happened. As a result, Gennady Burkov was sentenced to the highest punishment, execution by firing squad. The sentence was carried out shortly after it was handed down. His granddaughter Marina was never able to recover from the tragedy. She stopped communicating with men, avoided any close relationships, and devoted her life to caring for dogs. The girl never married and lived in the shadow of the terrible events until the end of her days. The case of the Majors and their crimes remained classified for a long time. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union did the materials become available to the public, but even then, the story remained a dark page that people preferred not to remember. I would like to apologize in advance for any errors in the text or voiceover. I am still learning, and the language of the channel is not my native language. The voiceover was done using artificial intelligence. I would be grateful if you could point out any inaccuracies. This will help me correct them and improve the content. Your opinion is also important to me. Share your thoughts on the topic in the comments. Your support inspires me to find and tell even more fascinating stories. Thank you for participating in the development of the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss new episodes. I would like to apologize in advance for any errors in the text or dubbing. I am still learning, and the language used on this channel is not my native language. The dubbing was done using artificial intelligence. Please point out any errors so that I can correct them and improve the quality of the content. I would also be happy if you shared your thoughts on the topic. Your support in the comments motivates me to continue searching for new interesting stories. Thank you for your understanding and participation. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new stories.